Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. We're going to get started in just a moment. Right. It is now 2 after 2 Eastern Time. This is Katie Watts with the National Center on Subsidy Innovation and Accountability. Welcome to the Year 1 Error Rate Training on Completing Reviews and the ACF404 State Improper Payments Report. And before we begin, I just wanted to go through a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, if you have any questions during the webinar, you can either raise your hand or you can type the questions into the questions box on the GoToMeeting dashboard. And we will stop throughout the webinar to address questions. Sometimes I might not respond right away, but we will definitely try and address everything that comes through. Secondly, there are a number of handouts that I emailed about an hour or so ago, hour or two. And they are also available in the handouts box on the GoToMeeting dashboard. If for whatever reason you did not get them, or if you cannot access them from the dashboard, you can send me an email and I'll make sure you receive those after the webinar when I do follow up. We have scheduled 90 minutes. We might not use all that time. We might be able to end a bit early, but I just wanted to give plenty of time, so I'm not rushing through slides at the end, which has happened on several webinars in the past. For introductions, again, I am Katie Watts. And I am the Error Rate Lead with the National Center on Subsidy Innovation and Accountability. I have with me today a few colleagues who are not going to be talking probably, but they are here to help with questions that come in and just with some logistical stuff behind the scenes. They are Mike McKenzie and Janae Williams. They are both error rate specialists and work on the program integrity team at NCSIA with me. We also have representatives from the Office of Child Care, Oversight and Accountability Division. We have Linda Winings and Adi Fature. And we also have representatives from the ACF regional offices around the country. So welcome to all of you, and of course, welcome to all of the state staff we have on the call. Really quickly, our agenda today, we will be spending most of our time walking through the ACF404 report. First, we'll spend a bit of time showing you how to get started with the Online Data Collection System website, or OLDC. Then we'll get into the ACF404 report questions. Then we'll spend some time on next steps for the Year 1 state cohort. And if there's time left at the end, we'll open it up for questions. But again, we will also address questions as they come in throughout the webinar. I always like to take a look at this timeline during our cohort calls, just to remind you of the timeline for your cohort. So we are just about at that second to last row. I think everyone, well, I know that all of the Year 1 states have completed their SDAPs and record review worksheets. You've all had your joint case reviews. So we're coming up on, again, that second to last row for submitting the State Improper Payments Report, which will be due on June 30th of 2023, so just under a month from now. The last row is for the corrective action plan. If your error rate is above 10%, that will be due 60 days after the 404 report deadline. which is around the end of August. We're not going to be speaking a lot about I don't think we're going to be speaking about the corrective action plan at all today. If you do have an error rate above 10%, that's something that we will get in touch with you about, kind of meet one-on-one about that. And in this slide, we have a list of frequently used acronyms. I think probably a lot of you have seen these before. When we've used these acronyms during the webinar, we've tried to remember, we're going to try to specify the meaning the first time it's used instead of just focusing on, or instead of just relying on the acronyms. But we also have this here for you to refer to. We're not going to go through this list right now, but you can take a look at it and come back to it if you need to. So to start out, we're going to spend some time on getting started with the OLDC, or Online Data Collection System, both how to access it and then how to use it once you're in the system. So many of you who will be working on the 404 report in the OLDC likely already have at least some experience with the site, either with entering the SDAP, or maybe you used it to complete the 404 last cycle 3 years ago. But if you are totally new to the OLDC, you will need to request access. There's a form to complete, which is in your handouts. That, again, was either emailed to you or you can get it from the handouts box. Or you can request the form from your regional office. Once you've completed the access form, you'll then return it to the regional office and we'll make sure you get set up in the OLDC. If you have worked in the system before, but you're having trouble logging in, you can let us know. You probably don't need to get set up with access again. You probably don't need to complete that form, but you might need to either reset your password, or you might just have forgotten your username, but we can help you with all of that if that happens. Multiple people in your state can have access to the report. In fact, we recommend that. It's good for more than one person in your state to be able to at least enter data, so that if the main person is out for the day, then someone else is able to get in and work on the report. On the left, this is the website link for the OLDC. Once you have your access set up, you'll then need to navigate to the site and set up your login credentials with login.gov, which you can do through this site. If you've used the OLDC before and you have trouble logging in, and we've kind of given you the right username, reset your password, and you're still having trouble logging in, you might also need to set up new credentials with login.gov. Again, if that happens, we can help walk you through that process. On the bottom right, I have the email address for technical questions about the OLDC. If you are, again, having trouble logging in, you can reach out to them. You can also reach out to us to help with that. If there's some problem once you're in the website, something's not loading right, something like that, you're getting error messages, this is who you would reach out to. If it's more content related, a question about the 404 report, then you would reach out to me or to your error rate specialist or regional office. So this, again, is more for the technical side of things on the website. Once you have successfully logged into the OLDC, this is what you will see. It's the application launch page, and it looks like this screenshot. you'll click on the link for OLDC, which is here in the top right corner. And then a new page will open, which is the OLDC homepage. There's two versions of the homepage. The default is the regular version, which is on the left. But if you want, you can switch to the enhanced version, which you can see on the right. There are not any significant differences in functionality between the two. The enhanced version has a few different capabilities on the home screen, such as being able to view your most recent activity. But that's it. The differences between the two are limited to this home screen. So once you click out of this home screen, there are no differences between regular and enhanced. Regardless of whether you're looking at the regular or enhanced homepage, you'll see this list of links on the left side of the screen. And you're going to want to click on the top link, which is Report Form Entry. And then you'll leave the homepage and be taken to the form selection page. The form selection page, as you can see in this screenshot, has a series of drop-down items. And on the next page, I'll show you what to do for those. So the first of the drop-downs is to select your program, where it says program name. You will choose Child Care and Development Fund Mandatory and Matching. Now on this screenshot, that's the only option showing in the drop-down, but depending on your OLDC access capabilities, you might see additional options here. But that's what you will want to select, the Child Care and Development Fund Mandatory and Matching. And next you'll see the grantee name. Here you can see I have a lot of options, but you'll probably only see your state's name pop up. In some states, there will be more than one grant option. If you look closely at the screenshot, you might see like Alaska has more than one grant listed. If your state has more than one, just make sure you're entering the report under the correct grant. It should be the same one where your SDAP was entered and approved. But if there's any questions, please reach out to your regional office. We don't want you to type up your entire report under the wrong grant number and then have to do it all over again. So once you have picked the correct grant, step 3 is to select the report. And again, in this drop-down, you might see more options depending on your OLDC roles and capabilities. But whatever you see in the drop-down, you're going to want to pick Program Performance Form, ACF404. And then once you have selected the ACF404, this box will pop up. This shows a list of the different review periods. These represent the case review periods. So for this cohort, the case review period ran from 2021 to 2022. To start a new report, you'll refer to the line for, again, 2021 to 2022 and click on the plus sign. You can also see on this page the state's 404 reports from prior reporting periods, and these are available for viewing if you would like. There are a few items on the 404 report where you do need to refer to past reports, so this is where you'd be able to find those. Once you have started your 404 report and saved it, you can log out and come back in and access the saved report. That's what the box will look like once it's been saved. To go back and edit, you'll want to click on the icon on the left. And also there's some other icons here. The first allows you to see the report status and history. The icon in the middle is to generate a printable version of the latest saved version of the report. And on the right, this icon is just to view the latest version. So here's some general tips for using the OLDC for entering your report. First, make sure that you save your work often. Your work is not saved automatically, so we don't want you to lose anything if your computer freezes up or crashes while you're entering the report. We always recommend having a backup copy of your 404 report. Responses saved like in a Word document. You should be able to copy and paste it into the OLDC. Before you are able to submit, you'll need to click a button that says Validate, and I'll show this to you later in the webinar, what that looks like. But when you validate, you'll get a list of any issues that have come up in your report, if there are any. Some of these are considered warnings, which you should read and address if necessary, but the report can still be submitted if there are any warnings. However, if there are any errors, those must be fixed before you submit. Once you've submitted, if you do need to make any changes, the designee will need to uncertify and unsubmit. That can be done from the report status page, which can be accessed. I'll show you from the last screen again. But the report status page is going to be, see where the arrow is, it's that second icon, and that kind of looks like a graph or a chart. That is the report status page. So if you need to go in and uncertify and unsubmit, that's where you will do that from that link. Are there any questions about getting started with the OLDC or getting into the website? I know sometimes you don't have any questions now, but something might come up once you're actually doing it. So if that's the case, again, you can always reach out to me or to Janae or Mike or to your regional office. So during this portion of the webinar, we will be going through each of the parts and items of the 404 report to show how they're completed and how they will be entered in the OLDC. To introduce the report a bit, this slide shows the 3 different sections of the 404. First is the program assurances and certifications. Part 2, there are error measures, and these are the numbers, the quantitative measures. And Part 3 consists of the narrative responses. We'll start at the beginning with Part 1, which again is program assurances and certifications. This is a screenshot from the ACF404 template from the data collection instructions. I just wanted to show you what's included in this part. I'm not going to read it all here, but what I wanted to focus on is that kind of the bottom half. The fields you're seeing are going to be pre-populated for you on the OLDC. The certifier will just have to click on a link to e-sign. And although it's part 1 of the report, this certification is actually the very last thing you do before submission, after everything has been entered and verified. One more thing I wanted to mention. Sometimes some of the fields here, like the email address, it might not pre-populate. I don't know why that happens, but it does. If that does happen, don't worry, we still do have all of your information on the system. So part 1 is pretty straightforward. Again, it's just clicking that e-sign button right before you submit. So then let's move on to part 2, the error measures. And before we dive into the items that make up part 2 of the 404 report, I want to take a step back and show you one of the elements from the record review worksheet, element 500. If you haven't been one of the people that conducts reviews, or if you have been one of the people that conducts reviews, this is going to look familiar to you. If you are not a reviewer, then this might not look so familiar. I will quick explain this. For each of the case reviews that are completed, the reviewer enters their findings here into what we call element 500 of the record review worksheet. Here in item 1, the reviewer records whether the case had any error in it. In item 2, the reviewer records whether, if there was an error, was it caused by missing documentation or not. Items 2A through 2E, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but these just ask for some additional information about the missing or insufficient documentation errors and whether they were able to be mitigated through an additional inquiry process. Item 3 is where the reviewer records whether the error, if there was one, resulted in either an overpayment or an underpayment. Item 4 is the amount of the improper payment, if there was one. And then item 5 is the total payment amount for the sample month for that case. And the reason I'm showing this to you is because the information that the reviewer entered here in column 2 of element 500 for each of your worksheets, this forms the basis for many of the items that you'll be completing here in part 2. You'll be reviewing and tallying up a lot of the figures that you've entered here. So when I'm walking through the different 404 items in the next few slides, I'll be referencing these element 500 items a lot. So that's why in the handouts, I did include a copy of the record review worksheet, so you can go ahead and refer to it as well if you would like. So now I'll be starting with the 404 items, and as I go through, I'll use some hypothetical numbers as example to illustrate what you might be entering here. So let's start with item 1. This is the total number of cases reviewed, which in every state is going to be 276. Item 2 asks for the total number of cases with an error. This includes any improper payment error as well as non-payment errors. To determine this figure, you'll need to refer to your completed record review worksheets and tally up the total number of cases that have a 1 entered in element 500, column 2, number 1. And we'll say that our state had 45 cases with an error. And then item 3 is the percentage of cases with an error. You can see here at the bottom of the screen, I've given the formula to determine this, but you don't actually have to do the math yourself since this item is auto-calculated in the OLDC. In our example state, the percentage of cases with an error turned out to be 16.3%. And I'm going to actually switch over to the OLDC right now so you can see how that auto-calculating works. So for item 1, total number of cases reviewed is 276, and total number of cases with an error is 45. Once you have entered those two, you can click the Save button. And then you can see that this item 3 has been auto-calculated for you, and it's 16.3%. So once you have entered a set of items, again, we ask that you save your work often. Once you've saved, then any auto calculations will be done for you, and you'll be able to see them on your report screen. All right, item 4 in the 404 report asks for the total number of cases with an improper payment. This is the total number of cases with a number other than 0 entered in element 500, column 2, number 4 of your record review worksheets. So item number 4 in your worksheets, element 500, is where the improper payment amount is captured. So if that amount is anything other than 0, then that case would be included in this tally. This tally would not include any potential improper payments caused by missing or insufficient documentation that were mitigated through additional inquiry. Our state had 20 cases with an improper payment. Item 5 asks for the percentage of cases with an improper payment, which is determined by dividing the number of cases with an improper payment by the total number of cases reviewed. This is another item that is auto-calculated for you in the OLDC, so you don't actually have to do the math here. Our example state's percentage of cases with an improper payment was 7.25%. Item 6 asks for the total number of cases with an improper payment error due to missing or insufficient documentation, or MID. We call for short MID instead of missing or insufficient documentation. Similarly to item 4, we do want to ensure that you are only including those improper payment errors that remained after any mitigation through an additional inquiry. So you'll tally up the number of cases that had a Y entered in element 500, column 2, number 2, and also had a number other than 0 in number 4 of element 500, column 2, number 2. In our example state, we'll say that there were 8 cases with an improper payment error due to MID. Now we're going to get into some additional items about missing and insufficient documentation cases. 7A asks for the total number of MID potential payment errors. So this is different from the last few items in that here we're not asking about the number of cases with an error, but we're actually asking about the number of errors. So a case can sometimes have more than one error in it. This count should include all MID potential improper payment errors, including those that were mitigated and those that were not mitigated. The figure that you will enter here can be found by summing the figures in your record review worksheet, element 500, column 2, item 2A. We'll say that our example state had 13 MID potential improper payment errors. 7B represents the sum of the potential improper payments resulting from MID. So this is the dollar figure before any additional inquiry mitigations. And it's the sum of the figures recorded in element 500, column 2, 2B of the record review worksheets. You would apply the pooling factor here if pooled funds were used for your reviews. Our example state identified $3,440 in potential improper payments resulting from MID errors. You might notice here and in all of the items that are asking for dollar amounts, everything is rounded to the nearest whole number. So when working in the OLDC, if you do enter dollars and cents, they will be automatically rounded for you. (8A) asks for the total number of MID potential improper payment errors that were mitigated using an additional inquiry. And this is found by summing element 500, column 2, item 2D. In our example, there were 5 MID potential improper payment errors mitigated. (8B) is the total dollar amounts that were mitigated through additional inquiry. This is the total of the figures recorded in element 500, column 2, item 2E of your record review worksheet. And similar to 7B in the last slide, you will want to apply the pooling factor here if pooled funds were used. Our state had $1,320 of payments mitigated. (9A) asks for the total number of MID errors resulting in an improper payment that could not be mitigated. So this is actually just 7A minus 8A, and it's calculated automatically in the OLDC. The example state identified 13 potential MID improper payment errors and 5 were mitigated, so we're left with 8 here for 9A. 9B is asking for the total dollar amount of MID improper payments that could not be mitigated. And as you might have guessed, this is 7B minus 8B. And also, as you may have guessed, it's also calculated for you in the OLDC. And we have $2,120 for our state. All right, so at this point in the 404 report, we move away from the MID items, the missing and insufficient documentation items, and back to thinking about all of your case review findings. Item 10 asks about the total amount of payments for the sampled cases. This can be found by summing the amounts entered in element 500, column 2, number 5 of your record review worksheet. Apply the pooling factor here if applicable. The state here had $124,850 in payments for the sampled cases. Item 11 is the total amount of improper payments for the review period, which is the gross amount of underpayments and overpayments. This can be found by summing up the amounts entered in element 500, column 2, number 4 of your record review worksheet. And this item is calculated automatically for you in the OLDC by summing up the totals for the next 2 items, 11A and 11B. So looking at 11A, this is asking just for the total amount of underpayments that were found in the review period. And you're going to sum up the amounts entered in element 500, column 2, number 4 of your record review worksheets, just for those cases that also have a U entered for element 500, column 2, number 3. Our example state had $710 in underpayments. And then in 11B, you'll do the same, but for overpayments. So sum up the amounts entered in element 500, column 2, number 4, but only for those that had an O entered for number 3 of element 500, column 2. So the example state had $45.90 in overpayments. So once you've entered 11A and 11B, then the system will auto-calculate item 11. And here we have $5,300 for the total amount of improper payments for the review period. Item 12 is the percentage of the total amount of payments for the sample cases that are improper payments. And this is what we refer to as your state's error rate. It's calculated by dividing item 11, which was your total amount of improper payments, by item 10, which was your total amount of payments for the sampled cases. This is calculated for you in the system, and our state had 4.25%. If this item would have, if the result for this item would have been above 10%, then the state would be required to submit a corrective action plan. Item 13 asks for the average amount of improper payments. If you want to take a look at the math here, this is dividing item 11, which again is your total amount of improper payments, by item 4. Item 4 is the number of cases with an improper payment. So that's coming up with an average. This one is also done for you in the OLDC automatically. So the example state had an average amount of improper payments of $265. Moving on to 14A, this is your total amount of subsidy payments made using CCDF funds over the 12-month review period. And this is for all children, not just the sample. This is not a number that you're going to pull from your record review worksheets. This is an item that you're going to have to come up with. We ask in your SDAP how you're going to be able to come up with this item, so you might want to refer back to your SDAP. This is the total amount for all children paid over 12 months, not just for the sample. So it's going to be a pretty large number. For our state, we'll say that there were about 54,250,320. And then 14B is the estimated annual amount of improper payments. This is applying that error rate that we determined back for item 12. It's applied to that figure that was entered for 14A to get an estimated amount of improper payments for the whole review period. It's auto-calculated for you, and we came up with 2,305,638. Item 15 asks about the pooling factor. You'll have to check either A, B, or C. If your review was not based on a sample drawn from pooled funds, you'll check A. If your review was based on a sample drawn from pooled funds and you applied the pooling factor from your most recent ACF 800 reporting form, then check B, and you'll have to provide the number and percentage of cases that used pooled funds. In most cases, it's all of the sampled cases, and the percentage would be 100%, but not always. Some states, they do not all cases from the sample use pooled funds. So that's just something that you're going to want to take a look at to make sure that you're giving us the most accurate information. If your pooling factor was not applied to all of the sampled cases, then complete B3. And this asks you to describe which cases used it and why only certain cases have the pooling factor applied. If your state used a pooling factor that was different from the one that you gave on the most recent ACF 800 reporting form, then check C and answer these 5 items. Let us know what was the pooling factor, explain how you came up with it, and then give the number and percentage of sampled cases using pooled funds. If you did not apply the pooling factor to all sampled cases, then you would describe that in C5 there at the bottom. We do go back and look at your plans for the pooling factor that you described in your SDAP. And if there's a discrepancy between what you wrote there in the SDAP and then what we're seeing here on the report, we will go back and kind of just ask you about that discrepancy. If there's been a change, if you anticipate that there will be a difference between what you had on your SDAP and what you say on the report here, you can go ahead and let us know ahead of time. Otherwise, like I said, we'll just come back and touch base with you about it after we've reviewed your report. We're almost to the end of part 2 of your 404 report. Item 16 asks for some information on any replacement cases that were used. And as a quick reminder, you must have received approval from the regional office to use any replacement cases. For the sake of space, I'm only showing 2 months from the template. I just have October and November shown here. But let's say that our state had a replacement case in October because it was discovered that no payment was actually made in the sample month. And there were 2 cases replaced in that month for that reason. When you're in the OLDC, there's space to record the month, the reason, the number of times the reason was used. There's a list of reasons pre-populated, but if yours is not on there, you can select other and then write it in the comments. I'll take a minute to show you what that looks like in the OLDC, if you bear with me for one moment. All right, so we're back in the OLDC here. I'm scrolling down to item 16. You can see it at the top. Oops, sorry, I scrolled a bit too far. Item 16, number of replacement cases used for each month of the 12-month review period. So let's say, just like in the example that I showed, there were 2 replacement cases used in October because there was no payment made. So you would select this drop-down October. This drop-down has reason for replacement cases. There's a few reasons pre-populated, but since ours does not fall under any of these, it's not natural disaster, fraud, or appeal, we'll say other, and then write down the number of times the reason was used was 2. If these were your only replacement cases, then you'd be done here. If you do have either other months with replacement cases or within the month of October you had more replacements, you can go ahead and add rows here from this drop-down. So say I just wanted to add 1 row, you just click 1 and then add, and then another row will pop up. You're also able to delete rows by clicking on this check mark at the very right side of the row and then clicking where it says delete marked rows. So back to the webinar slides. The replacement case question is actually the last question from part 2 of the 404 report. I don't see that any questions have come in yet. So that's fine. We can move on to part 3, which is the narrative responses. And this section gives you an opportunity to tell us what happened during your error rate review, what you learned, what went well, what you'll do to improve your processes. The narrative responses are also very helpful for us. The information that you share helps us to learn more about what states need, how to improve training and technical assistance, and we also use this information in our federal reporting about the national error rate. So the information you give us here is very helpful for us. The first of the narrative items is 17, and this asks the following. Describe lessons learned or improvements made in the implementation of the review process during the current review cycle. So some of the things that you can do here is describe what you learned as you implemented your SDAP, what you did this cycle that was different from the prior one, anything that might have changed as a result of what you learned, anything that was unexpected, and so on. Please be detailed here, and also view this as an opportunity to spotlight your work. We really like to hear about what went well, so feel free to brag of it, especially if you had a decrease in your error rate or just anything new that really went well. We really want to hear about it. So don't be shy here. Like I said, feel free to brag a bit about your work. In item 18, you'll be providing some information about the potential improper payment errors due to missing or insufficient documentation. You must provide this information for all potential improper payments due to MID, regardless of whether you did an additional inquiry and regardless of whether there was mitigation. So there's a lot going on in this item. I know there's 6 parts, A through F. The good news is that everything can easily be pulled from your MID tables. So before I show you an example on the next slide, I want to draw your attention to the yellow box on the bottom right corner of the screen. So please double check to make sure that all of your MID potential improper payment errors are included here. I've included a bit about how you can kind of cross-check to make sure that things are entered correctly. The number of lines that you enter here should equal whatever figure you entered back in item 7A of part 2. That asks for your total number of MID potential improper payment errors. So if you entered 7 back for 7A, then there would be 7 rows here for item 18. Also, the number of lines where you indicate that you mitigated the error must equal the figure that you entered in 8A. And the number of lines where you say that you did not mitigate the error must equal the figure you entered for 9A. So please double check this before submitting. We will take a look closely at this when we review your submitted report. And if the numbers do not line up, that's something that we'll ask you to fix. Item 18 appears as a table in the OLDC, kind of like for the replacement case item that I showed you a few minutes ago. It shows up as a table and you can add additional rows to it then. The columns display A through F. Column A asks for the element where each MID improper payment error was found. Column B asks what was the MID. Your responses here can be pulled from column 2 on your MID tables. Actually, I'm going to quick show you the MID table right now. So looking at the mid-table, column 2, it asks to describe documentation that was missing or insufficient. So whatever you entered here, you can just go ahead and copy and paste that into the row of your 404 report, item 18. Column C asks for the dollar amount of the potential improper payment. This corresponds to column 3 in your mid-table. Column D corresponds to columns 4, 5, and 6 of the mid-table. So in the mid-table, column 4 asks whether an additional inquiry could be used. And then if you say no, you describe why in column 5. And if you say yes, you describe the additional inquiry in column 6. So here under D, you'll say either yes or no. Yes if you used an additional inquiry, no if you did not. And then pull the rest of your response from either column 5 or 6 of the mid-table, depending on which column you completed. Column E is the amount mitigated, and this corresponds to column 8 of the mid-table. And finally, column F asks you to explain how you determined whether or not the potential improper payment error could be mitigated. That can be taken from column 9 of the mid-tables. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples to illustrate this. First, let's pretend that one of our worksheets had a potential improper payment error caused by MID in element 330. The child's citizenship verification was missing. Again, this can just be copied and pasted over from the mid-table. The potential improper payment amount was $510. Moving to column D, the yes response was pulled from column 4 of the mid-table. And then the description, contacted vital records, was copied and pasted from column 6. In column E, the entire dollar amount of $510 was mitigated. And then in column F, there's a description that vital records provided the birth certificate. And again, that was copied and pasted over from column 9. In the next row, I show one more example. I'm not going to do this one in detail, but I just wanted to show you that here, the potential improper payment error was not mitigated, so we're able to leave columns E and F blank. So if there was no additional inquiry, sorry, I said that wrong just a second ago. If there was no additional inquiry, columns E and F can be left blank. If there was an additional inquiry, but it just was not successful, you would still need to complete those two columns, E and F. But here there was just no additional inquiry done at all, so E and F are blank. Item 19, you're asked to identify all improper payment error causes. If you were, let's see. Right. So you're going to provide all of the improper payment error causes. For each error cause, you'll be providing what that cause is, the number of cases with it, an example, and then whether it was caused by missing or insufficient documentation or not. So in the example here, just to keep it simple, I'm only showing 3 rows. In the OLDC, again, it's set up like a table, and you can add additional rows if necessary. So let's say that in our example state, there was income calculation as one of the error causes. There were 12 cases with this error. There's a brief example, say all sources of income were not included. You only have to, give a really, just a short sentence, a few words here for examples. And this was not caused by MID. So a few things to keep in mind for this item. First, sometimes we've seen the same kind of general error cause, but some of the errors are caused by MID and some are not. We do ask that you keep those in separate rows. So we particularly see this with need for care. So take a look at row 2, need for care. Work verification was missing from the file. This was a MID error. In the bottom row, it's also kind of the general cause was need for care error. But in this case, the worker, say, did not calculate the need for care correctly. So that's not a MID error. So make sure that if you, again, have the same kind of general category for error, such as need for care, but some of the errors are caused by missing documentation and others are not, please make sure you separate those out in this table. Also, we ask that you do some cross-checking here just to make sure that all of your errors are included. In the yellow box in the bottom right corner, I give some guidance on doing that. The numbers for MID errors here should match what you entered back in 9A. And they should also match up with what you included for your non-mitigated MID errors back in the previous item 18. So if you recall in 18, you're listing out all of your MID errors. You indicate whether they were mitigated or not. Those that were not mitigated, you're going to want to make sure that these are all accounted for here in item 19. The sum of column 2 here must be greater than or equal to the number of cases that you entered back in item 4. Item 4, way at the beginning of part 2, asks for your number of improper payment errors. We recognize that some cases can have more than one error in them. So this sum here, the second column in item 19, if you sum it up, we are going to want to make sure that it's greater than or equal to what you entered in item 4. These are all things that we check on our end when we're reviewing your report. And if anything, again, doesn't check out, we're going to send it back to you to make sure that it's fixed. So please just double check your numbers before you submit the report. If there's any questions about it, if you're not sure, if you want us to take a look at it before you submit, we're happy to do that. Right, item 20, again, asks for a list of your error causes as given in item 19. And here you'll give your plans for reducing error. You'll describe your planned action steps, the timeline for implementing the action steps, and the method or methods that you'll use to measure progress and impact of the action steps. So this is, again, it's set up like a table in the OLDC, and you can enter additional rows, delete rows, and so on. The first column just numbers your errors. So it'll be 1, 2, 3, and so on, depending on how many error causes you have. The next column, cause of error, will auto-populate based on your responses to item 19. If you're entering your report, you've entered stuff for 19, you get to 20 and it's not auto-populating, just go ahead and click Save in the OLDC and it should then go ahead and populate for you. Moving on to the next column for action steps, here we ask you to share specific activities that you are planning to help reduce that error. If you have multiple action steps planned for an error cause, you might want to number them here. That makes your response look much cleaner and easier to read. In this example, you can see that the state identified 3 specific action steps to address income calculation errors. In the next column, Timeline, we want you to share when the action steps will be taken and when you anticipate that they will be complete. So if you have multiple action steps, again, please use numbering here to ensure that they all align. Finally, the column for progress measurement, describe how you'll track both the completion of your action steps and whether they are having the desired effect in reducing the error. Again, you can use the numbering system to make sure that everything lines up, as you can see in the example here. We certainly appreciate when states give a lot of detail here. Again, it can really look, it can be difficult to kind of read through it and make sense of it if it's just a lot of text without bullet points or numbering here. So we really do appreciate when you take that step to kind of clean it up a bit by numbering everything. So here are a few pointers for item 20, just again to help. I just said this, but just to reiterate, highly recommend using numbering for action steps with corresponding timelines and progress measurements. Ensure the action steps are directly tied to error causes. So if they kind of seem a bit vague, we will probably go back to you and ask for some more detail. How does these action steps really tie to the error? Ensure that the timelines and progress measurements all tie together, back to the error cause and back to the action steps. So try and be specific as possible. And also something to think about, if any of your errors this cycle were also errors last cycle, we know that happens, that's fine, but what will be done differently this cycle to address those errors? So that's it for item 20. Let's move on to item 21. 21 is actually broken into 2 parts. For 21A, you're going to enter the amount of improper payments from this review that are expected to be recovered. Now, the amount that you give here should not exceed the amount of overpayments as reported in 11B. If the amount that you expect to recover is less than the amount of overpayments, then describe the reason limiting collections. When you're thinking about your estimates for recovery, think about your history of collecting overpayments and any state laws that might limit the collection amount. In 21B, enter the amount that was collected as a result of the previous review. And if it was less than the amount that you expected to recover, then describe the reasons why. You'll need to refer to 21A on your report from last cycle, from 2020, to see what the expected amount was. The amount that you enter here should not exceed the amount of overpayments that was reported back in 2020. So again, this is just asking for, in 21B, this is just asking for what you recovered from those improper payments identified last cycle. It's not like all of the overpayments that you collected, outside of this review. Item 22 is where you'll describe your information systems and other infrastructure that assist in identifying and reducing improper payments. Here we're talking about systems that help with eligibility, systems that help to identify and reduce errors, and also systems that help with the improper payments process. You might think about eligibility systems that interface with other programs, automated systems that might highlight or profile potential improper payments, eligibility worker alerts, and so on. It doesn't explicitly say this here, but you can also describe any limitations that you have with your current technology and any plans that you have to acquire additional systems or update what you already have. Item 23, you'll provide findings and targets from the current and last cycle, and also future targets for a series of error measures, including percentage of cases with an error, percentage of cases with an improper payment, percentage of improper payments, average amount of improper payments, and estimated annual amount of improper payments. So this sounds like a lot of data, but most of it is set up for you in the OLDC. I'll show you how that looks on the next slide. Here's the table with those error measures listed on the left, with the 5 error measures listed on the left. The figures for prior cycle data, prior cycle target, and current cycle targets will all auto-populate based on what was entered in your 2020 report. The data for the current cycle will also auto-populate for you based on what was entered in part 2. So really the only column where you have to enter new data is this last column, targets for next cycle. So a couple of things to keep in mind as you set your targets for next cycle. We do often go back to states to ask how they calculated their targets, particularly your target for estimated annual amount of improper payments. That's the one at the very bottom right. This figure should be calculated by taking your error rate target and multiplying it by your annual amount of payments. We know you don't necessarily know what your annual amount of payments will be in 3 years, but if you can think of a ballpark figure for what that will be, then you can take that and multiply that by your error rate target to come up with your estimated amount of improper payments. In item 24, you'll be comparing your current cycle data to your current cycle targets. So your current cycle data, again, is that middle column, and your current cycle targets are what you set last cycle. That's the second to last column. If any of those targets were not met, you can describe why, and also refer to the action steps you described in item 20. How specifically will these be used to address the areas where targets were not met? And the last item in the 404 report is 25. Here you'll be thinking back to your improper payment error causes identified in your report from 3 years ago. Describe the action steps that were taken, whether the action steps reduced the error causes, how the progress was measured, and any barriers to the effectiveness of the action steps. And I'll show you some more of this on the next slide. This gives you an idea of how the item 25 will look in the OLDC. The first column will pre-populate based on what you entered for your error causes last cycle. The next column, you'll want to take a look at your 404 report from last cycle, specifically item 17. What were your planned action steps? Were they implemented fully, or was progress made towards full implementation? You should also include any additional actions that were taken. In the next column, did the action steps reduce the identified errors? You can simply say yes or no, or you can say more if you want. If multiple action steps were mentioned in the previous column, make sure you include responses for each. And for the next column, how did you measure your progress in reducing the identified errors? Again, you might wish to refer to your previous report since your plans for measurement were included there. That might be a good starting point. But if you actually did something different from those plans, then you'll want to describe that here. And then in the last column, describe any barriers or setbacks in implementing the action steps. Or maybe you did implement things, but still did not see the intended results. You can just say that here as well. If you did not have any barriers, if everything went great, then you can just say none. You don't need to say anything else. Right, I don't think any questions have come in. So this takes us to the end of the 404. At this point, once you have entered everything for each item, then you'll want to save it one more time and click on the validate box at the bottom. And like I stated earlier in the webinar, when you click validate, it might show warnings or errors. These should all be addressed, but you can still submit the report with warnings. You cannot submit it if there are errors. Those will need to be fixed. As you begin to complete your 404 reports, we can offer some TA support. Here are some of the things that we can do. First, we will be holding an office hour session in the next few weeks. Once we get it scheduled, we'll send out an invite. Office hours are informal. You can just drop in at any time. Usually it's scheduled for like an hour. You can pop in at any time to ask questions. If you don't have questions, but you just want to listen in to see, you know, if what other states might be asking, you can do that. But we are not presenting anything. So you don't necessarily need to be there the whole hour. You can just, again, drop in anytime. TA can review your draft report before you submit. In fact, we actually highly recommend this. If there are any issues, we can catch those before you submit, and that usually means you can get it approved faster. If you do wish to send in a draft, we ask that you give us a few days to review it. If you know, the report is due on June 30th. If you give it to us on June 29th and ask to review it, you know, we'll certainly try our best to do it in time, but we might not be able to. So, you know, just try and give us a few days. We also offer a just-in-time training, which is a one-on-one TA session on completing your report and entering it into the OLDC. And this training session is really whatever you want it to be. Some states have used just-in-time to work one-on-one with us on completing some of the 404 items. Other states have used it, you know, we hop on the OLDC together, share a screen to help get TA on navigating it and entering items. It's just really whatever you need. It's, again, pretty informal, just a time where we can help with whatever your needs are. So if you'd like to schedule one of those, you can get in touch with us and we can help with that. And of course, just if you have any questions on any items while you are completing or entering your report, you can reach out to us and we'll help you. Reach out to your regional office to request TA, or you can email me directly, Katie. If you're in Region 1, email Mike McKenzie. If you're in Region 7, email Janae Williams. Just please copy your regional office on any correspondence. All right, here are the next steps for Year 1 states. If you haven't already, make sure you get your OLDC access set up. It's probably a good idea to just check on to make sure you're able to get into the system, even if you already have access, just to make sure there are no hiccups. To do that maybe a few days or even weeks in advance. Next step, of course, would be to complete your to begin working on your 404 report. And if you do want to have a just-in-time training, let us know so we can get that scheduled. And of course, submit your 404 report by June 30th of 2022, which is just under a month away. I did have a question come in from Gwen. Can you post the email we'd send the draft to? Sure. I actually used to put these right on the webinars, and I didn't do it this time, so I apologize. If you bear with me for 1 minute, I can do that. All right. So the top email address is mine, kwatts@wrma.com. So Gwen, that's who you would reach out to in Region 6. If you're in Region 1, I have Mike's email address in the middle. And if you are in 7, I have Janae's at the bottom. Regions 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, basically everything but 1 and 7 would be reaching out to me, the top email address. You're welcome. Are there any other questions? If not, you have our email addresses, you know how to reach out to us. There's also going to be an evaluation that pops up as you log out. So if there are any follow-up items, you can go ahead and put them in there, and I will follow up with you in the coming days. But otherwise, we look forward to working with all of you in the next month to get these reports in, and just remember that we are here to help. And we look forward to working with all of you. Thanks so much for joining the webinar today, and we will be in touch soon. Thank you, everyone. Take care.